Hello and welcome to the fourth part of this module. In this lesson, we will cover animating with shape paths and text. Both of these have a lot of parameters we need to go through, so let's get started. Shape layers are quite different from other types of layers as they have a lot of parameters that can be animated. More importantly, we can animate the vector path they are made of to bring even more animation options to the table. We've already touched on how to create shape layers, but as a quick reminder, we can trace a path using the pen tool, we can draw a shape using the shape tool, we can copy and paste existing shapes or paths from Illustrator onto path properties in After Effects. Finally, we can import vector Illustrator layers and convert them to shape layers by right-clicking on them and selecting Create Shapes from Vector Layers. Shape options. Now let's start our lesson by learning about some options that After Effects makes available when working with shapes. I'll start by making a triangle shape with no fill and just the stroke using the pen tool, but I will intentionally leave the shape open to explain some things. If we right-click over the shape in our composition, you'll see that we have mask and shape path options on the menu, and in the submenu, we have a few more options. I'll explain the ones we use the most. We'll start with the Roto Bezier tool that can be found on the Tools bar when we select the Pen tool. As you can see, when activated, it will try to automatically curve my path and round out the edges. This option can also be selected if I already have an angled shape made. Right-click over it, and on the Mask and Shapes path, select the Roto Bezier option. Now, as you can see, the shape has been rounded. The Close option. This option, as you might have already figured out, closes any open shape path. Next, the Set First Vertex option. This will tell After Effects which node will be used as the beginning of the shape. As you can see, if I do this with an open path, the place where my shape is open changes as I'm moving around the starting point of the path. This option is available when working with closed shapes, as you can see on my screen. The other two options on this menu are for grouping shapes, but it might not work as you think, as After Effects is talking about grouping shapes that are inside a shape layer, and not the shape layers on my timeline. To better explain this, I'll create another shape by selecting my current shape layer, and I'll add another triangle with the pen tool, and you'll notice that it doesn't create another shape layer. If I then select both layers and right-click, you'll see I get the same group options, and now they are a part of Group 1. Shape parameters. If we unfold our shape parameters, we'll see that unlike other types of layers, we have a contents group, and on the same row on the right, we have an Add option with an arrow. To understand what this does, I will first explain the basic parameters that show up when we create a new shape. If we unfold the contents group, we'll find another group inside called Shape 1 that represents the shape we currently have on our layer. If I create a new shape while selecting my current layer, you'll see I get another group called Shape 2. We can rename these if we want by pressing the Return key while having one of them selected. It's important to consider that a shape layer has a shape hierarchy inside of it, and that each shape has its own independent parameters. To explain this further, I'll unfold both my shapes. As we now can see, both shapes have their own path, stroke, fill, and transform group parameters. Again, we can rename them as needed by pressing the Return key on our keyboard. If I unfold both stroke groups for each of the shapes, you can see that both appear to have the same values. I'll type stroke in my search field to only make these parameters visible, so that it's easier to follow. As I was saying, we currently have the same values since we made both shapes using the default settings on our pen tool. Therefore, I can change Shape 2 stroke width to 12 pixels and change the color to blue, and this will only affect Shape 2. The same thing will happen with the other independent group parameters of the shapes I add to my shape layer. Another thing that is important to consider and understand is that shape layers can actually have an infinite number of shapes inside of them, and each of them can be animated independently. As all of the shapes are still inside of the shape layer, therefore any changes to the shape layer itself will be applied to all the shapes inside that layer. Inside our contents group, I could go into every group parameter and explain what each parameter does, but that could turn into a course of its own, because the main group parameters have other groups inside of them with even more options. So I'll briefly go over what each of them does. One quick thing to note is that you can select and erase any of them except for transform. Path is the easiest one to explain, as it only has one parameter that we can use to animate the vector nodes and handles of our shape. Next to it, in the same row, you'll see we have two arrows pointing to the right and left. These options tell After Effects what direction the shape will be animated from using the first vertex position. This will become more clear when we animate the length of the stroke. Next we have stroke. If we unfold it, you'll see we have a few parameters and groups. The ones you'll probably use the most are color, the stroke width, and the dashes option, which requires you to click on the plus icon option on the right to start adding segments to the stroke. After stroke, we have the color fill. You might already be familiar with fills, but here we just need to focus on the color and opacity parameters. Finally, we can discuss the transform group. And this might blow your mind, but yes, we have transform options for each shape aside from the overall transform options we have for the entire layer. This means I can change and animate the scale of each shape, and then animate the overall scale of the entire layer. Just think of it as though each shape is its own layer and is grouped inside a main layer. Theoretically, you could actually do an entire animation with a single shape layer by animating all the individual shape layers inside it. As for the shape transformation options, there are a few parameters we don't get in the normal shape transformations, like skew and skew axis, and as you can see, these are self-explanatory. Now that we've looked at the basic properties of shapes, we can move to the Add Options button we saw earlier that's in the same row as the Contents menu. If we click on this button, you'll see that we have a few options we can go through. Any of the ones you choose will get added to the shape group that you have selected, or if you have the main contents group selected, it will get added to that. Empty group. As its name implies, we'll add an empty group. Here we can add different properties from the Add Options menu that we are using right now, or by dragging and dropping properties from other shape sublayers. I'll create one now to help illustrate how other properties can be added and moved around. Rectangle, ellipse, polystar, and path. This adds the selected shape to the group, each with its own options to adjust the shape. Polystars can be turned into multiple shapes like polygons and stars, and have parameters that can determine how many sides there are, the radius, etc. All of these parameters can be animated using keyframes. Fill stroke, gradient fill, and gradient stroke. Just as their names suggest, they add fill and stroke parameters in case your shape doesn't have them or if they have been erased. Merge paths. If you have two or more paths in the same shape, you can select how they'll intersect each other. Offset path options. Expands or contracts the shapes, and can even do so by adding copies of the shapes. All parameters here are animatable. Repeater. Makes copies of the shape and adds another level of transform options that are interpolated between the first and last copy of the object. All parameters are animatable. Round corners. Very obviously adds a curve to corners and does so with a slider that can be animated. Trim paths. This one is one we use a lot as it allows us to animate the path or outline of our shapes. This works best if used only on shapes made of strokes and with no fill. Twist will deform the shape in a twisting motion depending on the angle and the center of the twist. All parameters are animatable. Wiggle paths auto-animates paths by making them oscillate or wiggle over time. There are lots of parameters to refine and create the perfect wiggle for your project. Wiggle transform enables us to create random wiggle movement on desired parameters such as the size, rotation, and position. zigzag. Creates a zigzag pattern across the contour of our shape. The order or position of these effects inside the shape layer can affect a single shape or the entire shape layer, like the ones in the last group from merged paths to zigzag. To make this more clear, let's look at the following example. I have a shape layer with two shapes inside, and as you can see, one of them already has animated parameters for trim paths and repeater. But if I select both of these options and move them out from the shape and place them inside the contents group, you'll now notice that both shapes are being affected and animated at the same time. This is important to know if we convert a vector layer into a shape layer, as it will probably have a few shapes inside. And if we want to animate something like the trim path option for all of them, we need to make sure we have it in the right place so it can work properly and as intended.